Hello, Michael here at Midnight Point. Before I start on today's topic, I invite you to subscribe to my website, midnightpoint.com, and please comment there or on YouTube or Substack if you're reading and watching there. Your comments are very helpful for me. Thank you. So today's theme is power, conflict, and responsibility. And I'm looking at it as a 2-year initiation in light of this new cycle of the Mars-Pluto aspects, along with Saturn and Neptune in Aries. I don't normally write or speak about aspects that occur over such a lengthy time, but while I was studying the aspects between Mars and Pluto for 2026, I decided to focus on their complete cycle, instead of just January, from conjunction to conjunction. And I focused on their waxing and waning conjunctions, squares, trines, and quincunxes. This is not a comprehensive look at all the aspects. So while I was studying this, I noticed that this cycle is synchronous with Saturn and Neptune being in Aries. The dynamics and themes of Saturn, Neptune, and their relationships will definitely, affect and color the Mars-Pluto cycle. Neptune ingresses Aries on January 27th, 2026. On the collective level, Neptune, dissolves boundaries and rewires the collective dream. In Aries, this manifests as intuition meeting instinct. And this is a drive to spiritualize action and reimagine identity. The shadow side of this includes illusions of heroism and escapist crusades. Even addictive battles for righteousness. The evolutionary opportunity that Neptune offers is to channel its dissolving force into new beginnings. And in these new beginnings, hopefully we're working on spiritual ideals and embodying them through courageous acts. The last time Neptune was in Aries, which was in the mid-1800s, right after, next decade or whatever after the middle of the century, there were world revolutionary movements and the reshaping of collective ideals. We find them in the building of nations at that time, specifically in Japan, Germany, Italy, and I'm looking at the U.S. Civil War as an impetus for reforging a nation. Now, nationalism had a particular positive aspect in history at that time, and now it has gone into the evil side, if you can say. So Neptune and Saturn and Aries creates an evolutionary synthesis. And when these two archetypes overlap, which is going to be between last part of 2025 through 2028, the tension will be profound. Neptune dissolves while Saturn crystallizes. And together, they demand that dreams, Neptune, be tested against reality, Saturn. And this creates an archetypal imagination of, like a visionary warrior who is not reckless, but spiritually aligned. The collective challenge is to avoid delusion-driven crusades, which is Neptune's shadow, such as found in things like scapegoating immigrants or others, others of any kind that are determined to be other, while resisting rigid suppression of instinct, which is Saturn's shadow. Their evolutionary task is to birth a new paradigm of leadership in which courage is infused with compassion and responsibility. And guided by vision. Neptune in Aries asks, what vision are you willing to act on, even without certainty? This is something that is definitely true for me, okay? And everyone that I'm close to, they're going through much of the same questioning. So individuals and collectives may feel a surge of imaginative energy, blending sensitivity with assertiveness. The human drama and perhaps cosmic humor means that this surge will inspire everyone at every evolutionary state, of course. So in identity and relationships, Neptune in Aries can make selfhood very fluid, okay, and shifting depending on context, while inspiring deep creativity. The positive aspects to this are bravery, okay, crusading for causes beyond egoism, being a heroic visionary on some level. One doesn't have to be working on the world stage to be a heroic visionary. The shadow aspects are impulsivity, turbulence, aggressiveness, and being solitary. Evolution calls us to embody ideals through our courageous acts, but grounding them and grounding our spiritual vision in lived reality. Meanwhile, the risks and challenges that will confront us are, illusory crusades based on Neptune's shadow in Aries. And this is, one of the things that this does is like inspiring false messiahs and reckless movements, MAGA, etc. The risk of identity dissolution will continue to happen as individuals struggle with grounding themselves and selfhood shifts with context according to their participation in narcissist victim dynamics. The fiery Aries energy can lead to rash decisions if it's not tempered by, reflection. Saturn in Aries, 2026 to 2028, is a karmic call, okay? Call to mature the soul's instinct for action, courage, and identity. And it challenges impulsive self-assertion and demands the disciplined cultivation of authentic leadership, responsibility and desire, and the transformation of will, our raw will. Transforming all this into sustainable, soul-aligned purpose. This is what we're being called to do. Saturn is in Aries for the cycle of aspects between Mars and Pluto, from the conjunction to conjunction during 2026 to 2028, as I've said. Saturn entered Aries in May 2025, where it will remain until April 2028. And this transit marks the beginning of Saturn's 29-year cycle, urging societies and individuals to harness instinctual Aries energy into sustainable and responsible action. If we consider the raw drive, instinct, and assertion of Mars, along with the deep transformative power of the death and rebirth cycles and the collective evolution of Pluto, as well as the Mars-Pluto aspects, this intensifies willpower and will confront issues of control, survival, and empowerment. These often bring crises or breakthroughs that force us to act from a deeper place rather than egoism. Saturn in Aries demands, a disciplined courage and and responsible leadership, our own authorship as individuals, and how we express that authorship into leadership in groups. Mars-Pluto aspects during this period are filtered through Saturn's lessons, right? Impulsive force must be matured into strategic, karmically aligned action. So there's a tension, okay? Do we act from instinct, or do we integrate power responsibly for long-term transformation? Individuals, will experience Mars-Pluto aspects during Neptune and Saturn and Aries as initiation into soul-level courage. They force, these initiations, will force individuals to confront shadow impulses and transform them into empowered, disciplined action. In societies, these aspects mark periods of upheaval where collective will, Mars, collides with systemic transformation, Pluto. Saturn in Aries ensures that the outcome is not just destruction, but the forging of new lasting structures, okay, of leadership and identity. We really have to get beyond just tearing things down for the sake of tearing things down. Aries embodies initiation, desire, and raw instinct, and Saturn requires these impulses to be disciplined, structured, and purposeful. Evolutionary astrology frames this as the soul learning to channel courage into responsibility rather than reckless assertion, which is, myriad in the world. It's found everywhere. Aries is the sign of selfhood and beginnings. And Saturn here tests whether identity is rooted in egoism or in soul-aligned will. The evolutionary task is to embody authentic leadership and take responsibility for one's choices. Saturn in Aries asks for karmic courage, facing fears of inadequacy, failure, or rejection. The soul must learn to act with integrity, even when instinct, pushes toward impulsivity. This is about becoming a long-term warrior rather than a short-lived crusader. We must listen to Saturn as Saturn sets limits and boundaries. Aries wants to break through. The tension then creates lessons around healthy assertion, respecting the autonomy of others, and building sustainable initiatives. Balancing independence with responsibility promotes evolutionary growth. Societies will test new models of authority and personal responsibility during this time. And Saturn in Aries encourages collective restructuring based on courage and aligned action. And this marks the beginning of a new 29 and a half year cycle of Saturn's. We can say that seeds are planted for how identity and leadership will evolve globally, and this may be the time needed to remedy the damages done by Trump, his supporters, and those like him throughout the world. So, rash actions without responsibility These lead to setbacks, right? Over-identification with personal will blocks growth. And we see this every day. This is something that is in human beings, in our present overall stage of development, right? So Aries resists Saturn's restraint, but the lesson is to integrate, fire with form. So those born in 2026 through 2028 will carry, the signature of disciplined empowerment as warriors of transformation who must balance instinct with responsibility. Hopefully there will be many of them who will be aware of this. But the adults who are aware of experiences transit now will wrestle with events that confront everyone, with very stark occurrences, all the things that are happening in the world right now, in which instinct and responsibility are conflicted, okay, within individuals and in society. In evolutionary astrology, Mars and Pluto aspects symbolize the dynamic between the soul's deepest evolutionary desires, Pluto, and the way those desires are acted upon in the world, Mars. Now, Mars is often explained as being the lower octave of Pluto. And this is based on the perception that they are, they are frequencies, okay, which is all fine and good. However, I'd like to invite you, I do invite you to envision them as expressions of the human being, okay, related on a spectrum. Now, this spectrum is from the raw, instinctual, unconscious will and desire, Pluto, to how it is consciously manifested, harnessed, or distorted even in one's life, Mars, conscious will. The Plutonian will also holds, you can say, the deepest intentions for the further development, while Martian will lives in the what and how we consciously manifest our desires. Excuse me, need water. To understand the phasal relationships of Mars and Pluto, the starting point to measure this angular relationship is Pluto, because it's the slowest planet. Mars is faster, but it is always tied to Pluto's karmic undertow. Mars is known to activate the impulses of the inner, luminaries and planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, but also with what we have integrated from the outer planets. But those unconscious actions are still rooted in Pluto's deeper unconscious impulses of karma and destiny. With this in mind, let's look at certain phasal relationships between Pluto and Mars, okay, starting this month in January 2026, all the way through January 2028. Now, we do live in volatile times, so this 2-year-long period isn't so much about prediction, but about possibilities, probabilities, tensions, and the lessons will be given to that we will have to face. Mars enters tropical Aquarius on January 24th, 2026. So starting with a waning conjunction during the third week of January, becoming exact on the 27th, and waxing afterwards until the first week in February. This is the ending of one cycle and the beginning of another cycle, All this is happening in Aquarius. Now the expressions are instinctual, okay, being Mars, and that it's the beginning conjunction, okay? This conjunction brings about explosive beginnings and catalytic events. On an individual level, this means that moments of raw empowerment and facing shadow drives, okay, we will continually do this, either acting alone or collectively. But at a whole collective level, this means that societal upheavals and revolutions, technological breakthroughs, and social movements become more active. And with Saturn in Aries, these conjunctions demand responsible initiation, not reckless upheaval. The Saturnian expression is the higher aspect of how the system of laws and their procedures are structured. With the waning conjunction, what is being finished will not happen again as had been previously, just experienced. Lessons have been learned, and the spiritual nature of the lessons can be sensed, even made consciously aware. Because this is a dance of conscious and unconscious will, we can expect confusion, disillusionment, and even alienation. These are in the service, though. We go through these things so that we can learn the lessons that these states of mind provide, which ultimately lead to discovering what is truly meaningful, without external crutches, and how one hadn't discovered yet the meaningful during the last cycle. So Pluto demands we break free from the outdated self-definitions, and Mars is putting these impulses into action, outward action, okay? Now the Leo polarity point calls us to stand tall, take charge of our own lives, and evolve toward creativity, generosity, and love. To the degree that one does not align with their polarity point soul intentions, the expression will be selfish, chaotic, and destructive within the individual and, in the social realms. The effects of this unalignment seem to stand out all the time, right? Especially in the U.S. at this point, as the conjunction turns to waxing. Okay? Progressive initiatives will grow. Attachments to control and power will be violently defended as new endeavors move toward their intentions. And these will face off with those, who are adamantly, or maybe possibly reluctantly, holding on to old definitions of identity and power that are, selfish and devoid, to whatever degree, of any progressive spiritual context. As the new conjunction arises, people will have experiences of self-discovery. But these will clash with what has become rigid and no longer viable. The new functions may emerge instinctively, even spontaneously, during this new cycle. And these are based on what has already, been developed or driven by unconscious forces. Either way, experiences arise that promote self-discovery. Now let's move on to the square. A square between Mars and Pluto is a time of conflict, tension, and power struggles. Individually, we will face tests of endurance, learning to assert ourselves without domination. On the collective level, there will be clashes between personal will and systemic transformation. The highest calling by Saturn in Aries calls for these conflicts to be, training grounds for mature courage. Now, on May 26th, Mars is in the 6th degree of Taurus, and it will be at an exact waxing square with Pluto retrograde in the 6th, which is in the 6th degree of Aquarius. And all Mars-Pluto aspects, express a deep-seated need to transform limitations to individual identity and reality. And as we know, a square is a phase of being, especially a waxing square, is a phase of being a crisis in action. And there's a need to consciously establish and make concrete, Mars in Taurus, making concrete the new evolutionary impulse indicated at the conjunction. So pay attention to what is going on at the time of the conjunction. A new form needs to be made, but there's a fear or a temptation to slide back into old habits. This aspect, the waxy square, brings a great deal of raw power and energy which must be consistently channeled towards relevant goals. Okay. Because it's so easy to slip back, we really have to stay focused on our goals. The Aquarian Pluto impels us to rethink and reject, the externally sourced limitations and outmoded self-definitions, and to develop a sense of objectivity and detachment. At the same time, we need to confront any way we are being aloof, uncommitted, and rigid. So to the degree we are successful, we are directed toward the Leo polarity point, creative self-expression, heart-centered leadership, and courage to stand in one's own light. In this way, our conscious activity will be focused on heartfelt humanitarian endeavors. And this square may also bring about instances in which physical situations and or our own values are elements of confrontation. And this is exemplified by in the Sabian symbols of 6 degrees Taurus. A bridge is being built across a gorge, and 6 degrees Aquarius, a masked figure performs ritualistic acts in a mystery play. Now we can say the overcoming of difficulties and limitations of intelligence through instinctively practical actions, Taurian Mars, are constructive, square, in expressing one's sensitivity to a higher purpose, the innovative, the spiritual and humanitarian, Aquarian Pluto. Thus taking charge of one's own destiny, Leo polarity point. The activity of this square is dependent upon the evolutionary level of the individual, of course. And the highly charged sexual power of this square can be channeled anywhere on a spectrum. The spectrum, from being physically driven to channeling energy towards holding on to societally defined roles and identities, and aggressively defending definitions of individuality, or towards the path of self-transformation and towards service. On another level, or another aspect, on the stage of the U.S. Pluto return, the issues of taboo sexual practices and abuse are at the forefront of national attention, right? Regarding the release of the Epstein files and the redactions made more. This is just playing out now, isn't it? So, Mars ingresses into Gemini on June 28th and on July 5th, making a waxing trine to Pluto, retrograde, at 5 degrees in the signs, your signs Gemini and Aquarius. The Sabian symbols for the respective 5 degrees, Mars is a radical magazine asking for action, displays a sensational front page. For Pluto, a council of ancestors. Now these are imaginative pictures of the compelling and efficient power of propaganda and the exteriorization of emotional sympathy found in organized reform based on, the historical actions that inspire, a very potent foundation for character. The challenge to align one's conscious will with the will of the higher self is the purpose of Mars aspects with Pluto. The waxing trine calls for actualizing what one has previously learned about making this purpose individualistic and specific. Now, trines are interesting, okay? The trine also calls for becoming aware of the entire process of evolutionary purpose. Now, most positively, we can say this trine makes this process easier to integrate and establish within oneself and in society. But, those who do not live up to their higher calling will also experience a flow of unconscious will as genius intuitions and the desire and even the ability to actualize them in daily life. The proverbial, the devil will have his day, okay? But a higher evolutionary truth will still exist regardless, okay? And the individual will experience a humiliating downfall in that situation. And for many witnessing this, it's such a downfall can't happen too soon, can it? Mars ingresses into Cancer on August 11th in a waxing inconjunct aspect to Pluto. The exact inconjunct occurs on August 17th at their respective 4 degrees. Pluto is still retrograde in Aquarius. The Sabian symbols for Mars at the 4th degree of Cancer, a cat arguing with a mouse. And for Pluto at the 4th degree of Aquarius, a Hindu healer. Now there's the waxing inconjunct between them. According to Jeffrey Wolf Green, okay, this aspect brings either clarification or confusion, okay? And this is true in light of the adjustments necessary to accomplish one's evolutionary intent. So there will be inward and outward crises. These will arise to induce us to analyze what needs to be adjusted in our lives. And so, there's a sense of a special purpose to actualize, yet knowing how to make this real brings us to a crisis point. This unknown yet feeling the need to adjust oneself, it really calls forth a need for humility. One, well, we can say that one cannot help but feel humble in such situations, but this does not mean everyone. The archetypes of Mars, instinct, action, and desire, okay, this is rooted in Pluto's archetypes of transformation and unconscious drives, often can manifest as misalignment between impulse and soul intent. The challenge of Mars is about acting too quickly, right? Or through just ego-driven plutonic power struggles and hidden motives, these which bring about crises of adjustment and a need for refinement. Inconjuncts are awkward, right? Requiring reorientation. And here, Mars's instinctive drive may feel misaligned with Pluto's deeper evolutionary needs. And this aspect calls us to recognize compulsive or misdirected actions. And we must adjust how personal will, Mars, serves soul evolution, Pluto, to release old survival strategies that no longer serve growth. So in other words, the evolutionary task is to develop conscious choice and refinement of instinct. All this is born from and calls for deep transformations and surrender to align with the Spirit's intentions. And as I mentioned, Pluto is the embodiment of the soul's unconscious evolutionary desires, and Mars, the executor of those desires, show how we act in real time. When in opposition, the polarity between instinct and soul intent is a face-off, which can manifest as externalized conflict, projection, or confrontation with shadow material. Individually, okay, we will experience confrontations with externalized shadow projections. As a collective, we'll experience ideological battles and confrontations with generations and with groups of people, right? Saturn in Aries requires integration. The warrior must be patient and accountable. Through evolutionary astrology, we can understand that the waxing opposition between Mars and Pluto represents a crisis of confrontation. Instinctive action, Mars, meets the soul's deeper evolutionary intent, Pluto, head-on, demanding awareness of power dynamics. The waning opposition is a crisis of completion. Old patterns of desire and control must be released so the soul can integrate lessons, right? All the lessons that we have, and prepare for renewal. As one door closes, another opens, but we have to deal with all the stuff as we close the door. Now, the waning opposition occurs before the exact aspect, and of course, the waxing opposition, right? The waning opposition leads toward the closure of the cycle. This is the crisis of completion. The soul confronts what must be released before we close the door, right? And lets go of compulsive old survival strategies, power plays, and destructive desires. Its evolutionary task is to integrate by distilling wisdom gained from past confrontations to prepare for renewal. One can experience exhaustion from old battles and recognition of futility in repeating power struggles. The opportunity, is for us to surrender and align. The instinct with soul purpose, okay, you have to align it through humility and release. The waxing opposition occurs after the waxing square, of course, and before the culmination of the cycle. And this is a time of crisis through confrontation. Mars's instinctive drive collides with Pluto's deeper compulsion. So external conflicts highlight inner misalignment and power struggles. On a psychological level, we act out unconscious drives, confronting, externalized enemies that mirror our inner shadows. And this opposition provides the opportunity for conscious confrontation, learning to channel raw energy into purposeful transformations rather than just destructive conflicts. Okay? The evolutionary call is to recognize how personal will may be resisting soul-level transformation. This is not easy work necessarily. The subtleties of waning and waxing are, of course, umbrellaed by the archetype of the exact opposition. Mars comes into the exact opposition to a still retrograde Pluto on October 3rd, 2026, and at the 4th degree of Leo and the 4th degree of Aquarius, respectively. The opposition is about innovation, rebellion, and collective consciousness. Okay? It encourages breaking free from traditional constraints. This opposition can lead to intense interactions, giving rise to dramatic events or personal revelations as the energies clash and seek a resolution between individual desires and collective needs. This exact opposition suggests a moment of reckoning where suppressed rage, control issues, or survival fears surface, or interacting with people who have gone way past their boundaries. Retrograde Pluto intensifies the inward pull, forcing individuals and collectives to confront hidden motives and ancestral imprints even. Pluto retrograde brings out unresolved karmic material, unconscious power struggles, and evolutionary pressure to purge what no longer serves. Mars demands immediate action, okay? But Pluto insists on transformation before progress. So the opposition is the tension between the conscious drive of Mars and the unconscious compulsion of Pluto. It often manifests as, of course, externalized conflict, projection, of course, or encounters, which, the projections can be with others, as we confront them, and because they embody the shadow we resist. Encounters with authority figures or adversaries who mirror our own inner shadow will take place in one form or another. There will be a need to encounter the authority figures or adversaries who mirror our own inner shadow. There's a need to understand and then balance the dynamics between the assertive independence of Mars and the deep transformation of Pluto. So lessons in courage will be marked by choosing conscious action over reactive aggression. This will be very important. I mean, that's important anyways, but on the social realm, as things are getting so deeply dark, it's very important. So Jeffrey Wolf Green succinctly points out with this aspect that the individual soul intent is given a social meaning. The houses in which this opposition transits will show the life arenas in which the dynamics will manifest in a social context. One's needs, ideas, ideals, desires, beliefs, etc., will contrast not only with others, but also ultimately with higher will. And these will lead to power struggles between nations and institutions or ideologies peaking right during this time. Old structures collapse, Pluto retrograde, while new bold initiatives emerge, Saturn and Aries. There's a collective push to purge toxic leadership or outdated systems. December 5th, 2026 sees Mars in a waning quincunx aspect to a direct Pluto, still in the 4th degree of their respective signs, Virgo and Aquarius. The evolutionary force of deep transformation, power and shadow integration is now directed toward the outward manifestation of its themes rather than purely internal review. The quincunx is an aspect of adjustment, tension, reorientation. It's neither harmonious nor openly confrontational, but it demands recalibration, which is often through, definitely one has to go through discomfort or a crisis of function. The clarification or confusion that the opposition brought during the attempts to accomplish one's evolutionary intent, right? And the inward and outward crises called us to make the needed adjustments in our lives and created a sense of a special purpose to give, actualized social meaning to individual soul content. The waning in conjunct clarifies the concepts or awareness of personal and social limitations. What can and cannot be done to concretize social purpose. These will be the focus. Violations of individual or societal boundaries. These spark emotional confrontations that cultivate humility in both realms. Speaking of humility, I mean, I just cannot fathom, nor really comes down to speculate even, what it will take for Donald Trump and others like him to feel humility. Symbolically, the waning phase is the evolutionary letting go stage. Mars is finalizing its cycle with Pluto, suggesting integration of lessons learned and the release of compulsive patterns. This waning quincunx indicates a karmic moment where instinctual drives, Mars, must be adjusted to align with, once again, deeper evolutionary imperatives, Pluto. But it's not about confrontation, like the opposition earlier in October 2026, but often subtle, often uneasy shifts where old modes of assertion no longer fit the soul's trajectory, making this a period of inner discomfort, right? A discomfort where the instinctual drive feels out of sync with deeper soul imperatives. Saturn in Aries insists on disciplined individuation, courage with responsibility, and karmic accountability towards self-directed action. Now, with Mars and Pluto in a quincunx relationship, Saturn in Aries acts as a stern teacher, demanding that Mars's impulses be tempered by, maturity. And the quincunx to Pluto highlights the need to adjust how power and will are expressed, right? But there's a call that the will is to be expressed no longer through domination or compulsion, but through conscious, responsible courage. And so these are lessons in patience, learning to act responsibly, Saturn in Aries, while releasing compulsive patterns, Pluto. And there's a need to refine how one asserts independence. Lessons for all teenagers, lessons for all people indeed. This is less about force, more about conscious adjustment. So collectively, this calls for adjustments in global power structures, nations recalibrating, even military or economic strategies, economic models, a shift from overt conflict, October opposition, to more subtle restructuring of alliances, perhaps different alliances, authority and control. In July 26, 2027, we see Mars in a waning trine aspect to a retrograde Pluto in the 7th degree of the respective signs, Libra and Aquarius. And this waning trine marks the integration phase of the Mars-Pluto cycle. Mars represents personal will, drive, and action. Pluto symbolizes deep transformative power and evolutionary necessity. The trine aspect indicates relative ease, but flow. Flow is a better word. The trine operates with all expressions of planetary combinations and evolutionary soul levels. Out of karmic necessity, a harmonious trine may create ease and flow in one's life for the purpose of leading the soul to a necessary downfall. Right? Waning suggests closure, assimilation, and release of lessons from earlier confrontations. Evolutionary astrology recognizes that this is a time to consciously integrate past struggles with power, anger, and desire into wisdom. Into wisdom rather than, to repeat destructive patterns. Mars trine Pluto allows individuals and the collective to channel deep transformative energy constructively instead of explosive conflict. There's a potential for strategic empowerment and healing of past misuse of force. Of course, this depends on whether or not, or to what degree, one is resistant to the impulses for transformation. Water break. So Saturn, represents structure, limits, and karmic accountability. Aries Aries is ruled by Mars, so Saturn here is under Mars's influence, demanding disciplined assertion and responsible pioneering. And this placement emphasizes personal responsibility in initiating new cycles rather than having reckless beginnings, but carefully structured ones. Collectively, Saturn and Aries often coincides with themes of new leadership, redefining courage, and testing the integrity of bold initiatives. The waning trine signals the end of a Mars-Pluto cycle, while Saturn in Aries marks the start of a Saturn cycle. And together they symbolize a paradox, closing old karmic struggles with power, while responsibly initiating new paths of courage and leadership. In evolutionary astrology, a waning square, symbolized by the 270-degree phase, is about a crisis in consciousness. It's not instinctively building new structures like the waxing square, but about confronting what has been created, questioning its meaning, and releasing what no longer serves. This creates, new foundations, right? New foundations of awareness that embraces the spiritual. On September 9th, 2027, Mars's personal will collides in a waning square with Pluto's deeper evolutionary necessity. Now, this often manifests as a tension between ego-driven action and the soul's demand for surrender, for humility and transformation, of course. Mars represents instinctual will, assertion, and direct action, while Pluto symbolizes the soul's evolutionary intent for the transformation and the compulsion to purge what is stagnant. Now, this is something that is usually felt before made aware of what is stagnant within us or within society. Okay. The waning square represents or presents a challenge as Mars, seeks to push forward, but Pluto insists on an inner reckoning. This can feel like frustration, blocked will, or compulsive conflict until one learns to align personal drive with deeper soul purpose. Mars is at the 5th degree of Scorpio and Pluto at the 5th degree of Aquarius at this time. The Sabian symbols for Mars, 5 degrees Scorpio. A massive rocky shore resists the pounding of the sea. So revolution of absolutely stable elements in all life. Strong confidence born of fundamental perception. Otherwise, there's spiritual inertia. And for Pluto, 5 degrees Aquarius, a council of ancestors. The rich ancestral heritage of every individual, which is part of the foundation of character, directs real inspiration. Now, these symbols corroborate the dynamics of this particular square, calling one to be clear and trusting of Pluto's inspirations, intuitions of transformation, and the treasure that ensues. Thus, one will act in confidence, knowing one is living according to spiritual law. Spiritual cosmic law. I'm not talking about, human-made law. Walking the good red road. And those who resist this will end up constantly flying by the seat of their pants, unauthentically reacting to what is going on around them. The evolutionary task of Saturn and Aries is to mature the instincts to act. It demands responsibility in how one asserts independence, initiates projects, and expresses anger or desire. So, instead of the impulsive Aryan fire, Saturn insists on conscious, disciplined use of willpower. And this placement often tests whether one can balance courage with patience, and whether one's the pioneering impulses can be grounded in a sustainable form. Well, let's move on to Mars forming a waning square to Pluto, while Saturn and Neptune in Aries creates a crucible in which we will be forged. Mars, the instinctual energy of Mars, its drive is checked by Pluto's demand for soul-level transformations and Saturn's deliberateness. The waning square says, you can't just act, you must understand the deeper meanings of your actions. Now, this is a karmic moment when the soul is asked to release old patterns of domination, aggression, or compulsive willfulness. The challenge is to integrate Mars's assertive energy with Pluto's evolutionary intent, while Saturn and Neptune are in Aries. And this teaches restraint and conscious initiation by release and surrender of previous definitions of self and society. This makes the soul learn to act, not from compulsion or ego, of course, but rather from a place of mature responsibility and alignment with deeper purpose. The waning square is the confrontation with shadow. Okay, and when we confront the shadow, we must realize that brute force, Mars, cannot conquer the underworld, Pluto. Saturn in Aries is like the elder warrior archetype, who no longer is the reckless youth, but the seasoned fighter, who knows when to act and when to hold back. So together, they symbolize a soul learning to wield power responsibly, to burn away old compulsions and to initiate new paths with integrity. The waning trine calls us to consciously integrate what we experienced during past struggles with power, anger, and desire with wisdom, rather than repeating destructive patterns. So, to the degree to which an individual or society has integrated the potential for strategic empowerment and healing of past misuse of force, or to the degree one is resistant to the impulses for transformation, will be part of the foundation of what is now built during the waning square for the future. On January 12th, 2028, Mars returns to be conjunct with Pluto at the 7th degree of Aquarius. And this is the same degree when Mars was in a waning trine to Pluto. And since Mars previously formed a waning trine to Pluto at the same degree, the conjunction, you can say it closes the loop. It's like revisiting a karmic checkpoint. What was once flowing and harmonious trine now becomes intense and concentrated, the conjunction. What was missed or untransformed, it's upon us again, yeah? But now with the force of initiation rather than resolution. This cycle has been completed while Saturn is in Aries. We have all experienced, in myriad ways, alienation, confusion, dissociation, disconnect, and disillusionment, to learn what our personal and collective illusions are, and how we made these illusions, meaningful, and what and how we needed them for security. We have explored the raw catalytic power of Mars and Pluto, and how Mars, as conscious will, drive, and assertion, are connected to Pluto's deeply transformative power, through the different aspects. But now, conjunct again, they signify collective surges of force, breakthroughs, or confrontations with hidden power. And this is happening in the Aquarius setting, where the conjunction channels themes of collective systems, technology, social movements, and radical restructuring, into our consciousness. It's both about personal battles and group dynamics, networks, societal evolution, and how this lemniscate of experiences between the individual and the collective, and how they affect each other. The Mars-Pluto cycles, they last about 2 years. The the waning trine represents a period of integration and release, while the conjunction marks a new seed moment. Returning to the same degree suggests a resurfacing of a continuity, right, of unfinished thematic business. We have to pay attention to what keeps on reoccurring, what themes are running through our lives. Saturn in Aries, 2026 through 2028, is the defining power that emphasizes discipline and self-assertion, pioneering structures and testing individual willpower. It adds a stern karmic frame around the Mars, Pluto, Aquarian intensity. The impulse to act is checked by Saturn's demand for responsibility and maturity, which calls us to confront hidden forces, right, within the collective in technological order. As human beings, we continuously face each moment with various levels of consciousness, right? When we are totally unconscious of, and we react unconsciously, and when we are dreaming through our experiences, and we still unconsciously react, and the moments in which we are dimly aware and our unconscious is activated with perhaps some conscious awareness, seeping through. Hopefully we will learn to bring more of our unconscious content into consciousness until our daily consciousness is rooted in an unconscious that has more transformed content than not. So I will leave you with this. May our conscious choices be in alignment with the Spirit. May we be devoted to goodness, beauty, and truth. Thank you.